74107.
So the first thing you're going to do is just spell your name, and then give your title, your current title for where you're at, I guess. Or your PGY2.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
Okay. So Caitlyn Farrell. Either PGY2 or DO MPH.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Either one.
Perfect. And I don't know, do you want to mention the residency program that you're in, or how do you want to handle that?
Oh.
Well, let's see how it goes.
We can. It's up to you.
Cool.
Whatever you want.
So why don't we just start by talking about why you decided to go into medicine?
Why I decided to go into medicine. I don't know if I ever made that decision fully. I guess it was sort of a natural progression from when my dad died. I was a freshman in college and was sort of deciding on a major and things to do, and that certainly influenced me. And then I still wasn't fully convinced. I knew I wanted to, I guess, serve the underserved in some way. So I got a master's in public health. I've always had an interest in health policy and health systems. And then in working at the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts and various interactions, I realized that there was a piece that was missing for me, which is the individual patient piece. So I had a pretty good understanding of the overarching system of medicine, I felt like, but not how it was on the ground. So then I went to medicine, and now that I'm in medicine, I have a really good understanding of the day-to-day and feel like I'm missing a bit of that systems piece. So it's definitely still a juggle to find out where my perfect place in medicine is.
That's cool. You want to talk a little bit more about what happened to your dad, and what happened to your dad? And
Yeah.
how that inspired you to go into medicine?
Yeah.
Relates on the train next.
Sure. And she's whining. I don't know if you can hear her.
Can you hear her?
Yes,
Puppy?
coming through.
No.
That's okay.
Okay. Okay.
Did you scoot your beverage just an inch or two that way? Perfect.
Yeah. So what happened to my dad? So he was sick for a really long time with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, basically for my entire high school career. So it became sort of something that I got used to, I guess. He would go to chemotherapy and go to treatments, and then be at my softball game later on in the day. It wasn't until after he passed and I got older that my mom sort of let me know how sick he was. That entire time, it was sort of hidden from me at the time. What I do remember is going to the hospital after my freshman chemistry exam, coming out and getting a phone call and saying that I had to go directly to the ICU. And he died 48 hours later. But during the time where he was hospitalized and getting a bone marrow transplant, I would come down from college and spend some time with him in the ICU in isolation, and sort of learned about different things that happened or didn't happen in the hospital. It was my first experience learning about miscommunication in the hospital and misunderstanding and all of the various pieces. And it's hard thinking back on it because now obviously I have medical knowledge and I'm on the other side of it and understand how it can be difficult to communicate with patients. But yeah, slowly, piece by piece, I learned about all of the various things that happened to him in the hospital and things that could have gone differently in his care, potentially. And then maybe we'd be having a different conversation. Who knows? But
So, I mean, the piece that you wrote for Telluride was just, I mean, it's still, to this day for the blog, one of the best ones that ever, and touched everybody. Dave, the whole, we're in the back row trying not to cry as we're reading it that morning because it was so touching. You found Telluride, you were there as a PG, or as a
I was there between my first and second year of medical school.
Okay. So how did you find Telluride? Sounds like an infant.
I know. I don't even know how I found Telluride, to be honest. It must have been through some connections I had still in public health. But I honestly don't remember. I remember that I had to write an essay and I had to apply. And I thought, well, I'm probably not going to get in, but it would be really cool to be able to go and do this. Yeah, and then I went. But I don't exactly remember how I found out about Telluride.
Yeah, that was 4 years ago now?
It was 2014. Yeah, summer of 2014.
So what was it about the program that drew you into? Was it the patient safety piece because of what happened to your dad? Or?
Yeah, I think it was definitely the patient safety piece, because I had always had an interest in patient safety because of what happened to my dad, and just living through that experience. I think also my experience in graduate school, learning more about the science of patient safety, and
Yeah, we could start that over and just say what drew me to Telluride was.
Oh, okay.
And then just keep going.
Sure. Okay. So, what drew me to Telluride was definitely the patient safety aspect after living through patient safety issues with the care of my dad and experiencing that, as well as going through grad school and being experienced to more of the science behind patient safety and quality improvement, as well as being able to meet other people who found that this work was important and necessary. And I had just gone through my first year of medical school, which is basically science. And I felt kind of disconnected from my purpose of why I had gone to medical school. I think my first year I was a bit lost in returning just to the hard sciences and not the humanistic part of medicine. And so Telluride regrounded me in that drive that I had.
Do you remember what were some of the best moments of Telluride for you? Like, what were your biggest takeaways from being there?
I think one thing that I remember really well is the balancing act that we have to do, the balancing act in teamwork, but also the actual balancing on the board. I remember that. I remember the hike, obviously. And one thing that stands out to me are the conversations that we would have after the day was done, when we would go back to the hotel and all sort of just debrief over dinner and just continue conversations very casually. And a lot of organic things would come out that way. And I think discussions became a bit more complex and layered after the structure of the day had sort of dissipated. So I really enjoyed that. And I feel like that's how I became close friends with a number of people from Telluride.
That's really cool. So do you want to go into more detail about the teeter-totter game? I mean, was that, or is that just something that...
Yeah, like in what way?
maybe just the exercise, you know, like there were games and simulations such as a teeter-totter exercise that taught us that we had to communicate in order to.
Oh, like explain it.
Yeah, maybe, just.
Sure.
We don't have anything like that yet, and I think it'd be kind of fun that was something that stuck in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that I liked about Telluride was the different ways that we thought about communication and teamwork and complexity. So obviously there were lectures and we read books and we had discussions, but we also played games such as the teeter-totter, which is just an actual piece of wood that we would have to figure out how to balance by communication and adding certain team members onto one side versus another until we built out, like, I don't know, 5 people on each side or whatever it was. And that was really fun because it was putting theory to practice in a lot of ways, as well as figuring out who's going to fall off first.
It's cool. We also had the eggs under them. Remember the eggs?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God, the eggs.
I was just thinking about that.
I forgot about the eggs.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that conversations at the end of the day
Mm-hmm.
that became more complex.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anything specific that you want to talk about, like something that really opened up your network of people that were like-minded? You know, like is there anything specific, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. You know, I don't remember one specific conversation. What I do remember is all of us medical students and nursing students, there was one night where we all just decided to sit in the hot tub and talk. And I think we stayed there till like 11 o'clock or midnight, just having conversations about our experiences in medicine from either the patient side, the caregiver side, or now the clinician side. And just the wealth of stories that come out from each individual. The deeper you dive, the more you realize how this happens every day in medicine. Yeah, and then, you know, after Telluride, I stayed friends with a lot of those people that I was in the hot tub with, and ended up going to the Institute for Healthcare Improvement conference and stayed with someone that I met at Telluride. So it's been really, really great.
This, when you said this happens, were you referring to medical error or medical miscommunication?
Well, they're the same. Yeah. Or intertwined, I guess I should say. Medical error and miscommunication and patient safety are very intertwined and happen every day. You know, I think that before Telluride, I guess I thought that patient safety were big events. They were wrong site surgeries, medication errors, deaths, those sorts of things, which of course are patient safety issues. But as I've gone on in medicine and, you know, seen thankfully less of those major events, you still get a feeling that there are patient safety issues, and putting your finger on exactly what the issue is more difficult, I think, on a daily basis. So it's sort of redefining what is patient safety and how do we address that. And I think miscommunication among providers definitely leads to near misses and other issues. And for me now, it's what does patient safety mean from an outpatient perspective? I think a lot of times we think about patient safety as solely happening in the hospital with major things having to stay in the hospital for a long time or undergo surgery. But as an outpatient provider, how do we influence patient safety? So I had a patient recently who was a young girl who's pregnant for the first time. And she had a bleeding disorder that we knew about. And she was on Medicaid, didn't have great access to subspecialty providers, and was coming to our clinic here on the west side of Chicago. And we were doing our best to try to get her to see these specialists, and the people that we thought she needed to see. But then she ended up losing the baby, probably because of her bleeding disorder. And I delivered that baby after having taken care of her in the clinic. And you have to think, like, well, was this a patient safety issue? And I really felt like for me it was sort of that I could have done a better job, maybe, that I shouldn't have been the one taking care of her because I didn't have the right expertise. And how could I have helped her in some way to get to the people who did have that level of expertise? And it's difficult. It's really difficult trying to coordinate care both inside and outside the hospital. It's difficult when patients are coming from an underserved community and don't have access to the care that you would like to give them, ideally. Yeah.
That's a really good point. Do you want to talk more about why you chose this particular residency? And
Sure.
where that is a big gap. Like, whose responsibility is that really, right, to connect all those dots? And
Yeah.
another topic altogether. Why
Right.
don't we start with why you chose this residency?
Yeah. So I chose this residency program because I knew that I wanted to focus on urban underserved medicine. And I didn't know in what fashion I wanted to do that, and it almost didn't matter because the mission of the residency and the mission of the people there was almost more important than the day-to-day what I would be doing. And so my residency focuses on care of the urban underserved on mostly the west side of Chicago. I think that it's somewhere around 70% of our patients are either uninsured or underinsured. They're mostly Spanish-speaking population. And I had always known that I wanted to work with the underserved. I guess it was never really even a question for me. My mom is a social worker, and I grew up delivering presents to her kids on Christmas with my dad. My dad was the attorney for our town and would give out free legal advice, and it was the town that he grew up in, and that was never really even a question for me.
Yeah, it's too much. Can you hear that?
I can hear her now.
It's like it's so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our residency, we have a very strong emphasis on not only medicine, but also addressing the social determinants of health and community medicine. We have a strong emphasis on advocacy. We call our representatives in Springfield as well as DC regularly to advocate for certain issues that affect our patient population. We go to Washington, DC to lobby for our patients who might not otherwise have a voice. But yeah, it is constantly sort of coming up against this line of, as a provider, how do I address these issues of food insecurity, housing insecurity, violence in the community, undereducation, and how do I work with that and work in that population to ensure that they're getting the same care that everyone else is getting. And to me, that's another patient safety issue, really, is health equity.
We'll be using this interview duly for do you,
on the right side, can you just push your hair back over your shoulder? Perfect.
Sure.
do you want to talk
Actually, like, keep it on that right side.
So it doesn't look like I'm bald. That's it.
That's good.
Something like that.
You just had a hair that was like up here.
Oh, why? Oh, got it. Okay.
You're all good.
fabulous?
Lucy's so loud.
What's with the puppy? Is that too loud?
I don't hear it all the time. If you heard it all
I
the
can
time.
keep her company.
Is it going to be a problem later, Rob? Do you think? Are we going to be able to get rid of
The whining.
I mean, if in the quiet moments, you'll definitely hear her. So,
When the train's not.
one of you guys want to go?
Yeah, I forgot to tell you about the train.
That's actually, it's kind of a nice compliment to talking about caring for the urban
Yeah.
underserved with the train.
Yeah.
In the background.
I mean, you definitely remember that it's
Yeah.
right there. Oh my God, she's so spoiled.
It's like-
She's like, I know you're hanging out without me.
yeah.
That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
My dog would be worse, so fine. She's fine.
Alrighty.
So do you want to talk a little bit about when you realized medicine probably wasn't all it was cracked up to be for you personally, or did you always have a healthy skepticism because of what happened to your family?
That's a good question. I think that I always had a healthy skepticism of medicine, but I also had a very heroic outlook for myself in terms of being able to make change in medicine, which is still what drives me. I think that, when do physicians or people working in medicine realize that it's not what you thought it was going to be? I think that's a really complex question and goes into physician burnout, certainly. And when does that happen is a question that I know a lot of people are talking about now. I think in retrospect, for me, it probably happened in medical school, or at least when it started. I think residency is certainly another time when you realize that you're working in a system that you might not be able to influence as much as you would like. And you are sort of caught up in this system. And I think there's a feeling that until you get to a certain level, you might not have the voice that you wanted to have. And obviously that depends on the culture of medicine in which you're practicing at that time. But I think that the realization of the difference between the Hollywood version of medicine and the day-to-day version of medicine is something that happens slowly and gradually. It's not one thing that sort of hits you. And I think for me, it's been figuring out where I fit in that system, in this complex system, and where I can find joy in medicine and bring about the most change that I feel passionate about.
It's a great answer. So, do you think Telluride helped support your resilience? Because you knew there was a network of people out there that were good people that cared about making the system better? Or do you think you were always that resilient and found Telluride? Like, was it a chicken or a compliment kind of thing?
I think that Telluride definitely helped my resilience. I would like to think that I was somewhat resilient before I went to Telluride. But I think going to Telluride and having the conversations that we had and meeting all of those people there from all different levels of organizations definitely helps build resiliency, because it gives you this framework of knowing that there are people out there who share the same views that you do, and that there are places that are bringing about culture change and making a difference and fighting that fight every day, and constantly reevaluating how we practice and constantly re-asking these questions. And so to have that sort of framework, to know that that does exist and that those people will always be there for you, I think it lets you go out into the world and experience medicine where those things are not happening as much as you would like, and say, oh, well, how do I get to this other place? How do I build a culture of safety here from my position? What were the examples that were used or taught in Telluride? And how can I put them into practice? And being able to reach out to other alums and people that are still going to Telluride year after year, and knowing that you can always talk to them and bounce ideas off of them, I think is a really wonderful safety net to have.
How important is it to have a program director as a resident who really gets this stuff? I mean, how much influence does the program director have on the culture that you're trained in?
I think program directors have, they set the tone for the culture of the residency. And my program director has done a phenomenal job of bringing about a social justice curriculum, constantly emphasizing health equity, constantly revisiting our mission and our values, and defining what it means to practice where we practice and to do what we do. I think program directors and CEOs of hospitals and CMOs and attending physicians on the floor are all responsible for a culture of safety, and a culture of safety meaning that everyone feels safe to talk about patient safety issues and to know that you will be heard and you will not be individually scrutinized for reporting those issues. I think program directors and people at all levels of an organization are directly responsible for that, for creating that culture of safety.
So I don't know how much you want to go into the frustrations, because we're going to film you at the gym punching the heavy bag.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the ways that
Right.
you release that.
Right.
And we definitely want to talk a little bit about your family being somewhere else, and how trying that is, and your boyfriend being somewhere else. And, so how do you want to?
I don't know. I just don't want Deb to watch this. When is this coming out?
So the goal is to have it hopefully played at the Patient Safety Movement Foundation in January, if if they'll accept it.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'll release it however we can.
Yeah.
We'll try and get, places to view it. I think maybe it's talking about every residency program has its challenges, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing when and having the strength to make change because something else is right for you. I don't know how you get around. I mean, part of the frustration is she's not doing what she should be doing,
right.
Really. I think how you want to frame that without necessarily throwing her directly under the bus.
Right.
You could kind of put her near the bus.
Right. Right.
And then again, whatever you say she could see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I was talking about with this girl whose baby died, I mean, I felt like that was a mistake on my part, but a mistake on the attending's part, on the clinic, because it shouldn't just be my job as a PGY1 to make sure that she got everything that she needed. I mean, that's like how you train doctors, right? That's the theory behind it, is that you learn from those ahead of you and they set the examples. Yeah, so I felt that was a medical error.
And I know you talked about the most terrifying night of your residency, about being on call with 13, did you have 13 patients?
Something like that. Seems like a lot of my bad residency experience happened around obstetrics. Yeah. Yeah, the worst day of my residency so far was, the first realization that the duty hour restrictions were reversed. And that I would be doing 24-hour calls as a PGY1, which was not something I was sort of mentally prepared for, I guess. But yeah, I think one of the challenges of family medicine is that you practice in a lot of different fields, some of which you might be more comfortable in than others. So my worst day of residency, hopefully ever, was when I was on a 24-hour call as the only resident in charge of our obstetrics unit, and we care for mothers and babies. And I mean, you think about a systems issue. Not only was I the only resident on who hadn't done her obstetrics rotation yet during residency, and the last time I had OB was in medical school, which is a very different experience. But the way that this OB service is run is there's 2 different electronic medical records, with 2 different logons and things that you have to document in one versus another, and for babies versus another, none of which I knew. So I went in at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning and got sign out from another resident who was also a PGY1 and couldn't answer a lot of my questions, sort of the blind leading the blind there. And yeah, it was just a really awful day, awful 24 hours to having to take care of women in labor and their children, and not having my password to log on to be able to see their strips, their labor strips, and not knowing where to put orders in, and just feeling really awful, feeling like I was in a system that it wasn't just trying to push me to learn, it was pushing me to a place where I felt unsafe and uncomfortable and also awful, because you know, as I said years ago in my Telluride essay, is that I never wanted to be that provider. I never wanted to be that person who was making errors and who put patients' lives at risk. And, you know, sometimes you get thrown into a system and you just have to do the best you can. And you have to say, I know I did the best I can, so there must be something wrong with this system. And luckily, nothing bad happened that day. And luckily, my attending, when he came, he was a wonderful attending, and helped me. But that feeling that I had was just so awful and so nauseating to me all day, of just being completely out of my league and in a place that I felt I never should have been in.
So there's two ways I want to go now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about your best day of residency so far too, but I think let's stay here and go with how you deal with the frustration related to that, because that'll help set us up for the gym and walking the puppy. And
Yeah.
so the question, I guess, then is, how do you deal with the frustration and the upset and the not, you know, like the awful feeling? Where does it go? What do you do with it?
Yeah. I think dealing with the frustration, it's been hard. It sort of infiltrates everything that you do. Being frustrated in your job and not knowing your place and not feeling like you can make the change that you want to change. It's hard not to take that out on your family and your loved ones sometimes. But yeah, boxing is great. And, you know, like I said, you do have those people who share your values, and you have to hold them close and reach out to them. I have wonderful friends from medical school and wonderful friends from high school who are now in medicine, who share the same values that I can call and just vent and talk to. And take Lucy for a walk and get a glass of wine and just wake up the next day.
And do it again.
Mm-hmm.
When we had dinner that one time and your knuckles were raw.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, okay, you should really wear gloves. You're like, I had gloves on.
I had gloves on, yeah.
So why don't you just talk a little bit about your routine with the gym and how, you know, you remember one time in particular that you were just like, I gotta go hit something. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I had always been very into yoga, which I'm still very into yoga, which helps bring you into more of a Zen place, I guess. But it wasn't until I moved to Chicago that I discovered boxing gyms, which are amazing. Yeah, the first time I went to a boxing class, I thought, I'm going to throw up, and this is how I die. And then I left, and I felt amazing. And I just kept going back. Yeah, it's been great. There's nothing like hitting a heavy bag for an hour to feel like you've gotten all your anger out.
Is that okay with the train? Sure. Yeah, do it one more time.
Okay, what did I say?
There's nothing like hitting a heavy bag.
Yeah, there's nothing
Oh,
like
yeah.
hitting a heavy bag. Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing like hitting a heavy bag to get all your anger and frustration out.
But you bring a lot of internal resilience too, because it sounds like, and we were just talking about looking at narratives and empathy and burnout.
Yeah.
And then burnout in general, right? So
Right.
narratives increase your empathy, higher empathy correlates with higher burnout. wait a minute, what are we doing? Are
Right.
we leading lambs to slaughter by actually teaching them to be more empathetic? But I think there's another factor, and that is that resilience piece.
Mm-hmm.
Where despite its locus of control,
Mm-hmm.
to, like you said, I feel like I still have to find my place where I can make the greatest change.
Right.
So, what would you say to other residents who feel like they don't have a voice, who feel like they're in the wrong program, you know?
Yeah. I think what I would say to other residents is that medicine is a big place, and if you have enough passion to care about these things, then there is a place for you. You just have to work really hard to find it. And that's what I tell myself. And I don't know if I have that answer yet, but the more doors you keep open, the more opportunities are available to you. And it might not mean practicing medicine the way you thought you were going to, or going to the office every day, or going to the hospital every day. It might mean working from a completely different avenue, and that's okay. And you can still make an impact from a different perspective. And there's always a way out.
It's really healthy. One of the things that I remember saying to a Telluride class, they asked us to say something, and it was, as soon as somebody in that system makes you feel less of you, it's not about you anymore, it's about them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the person that you have to figure out how to get around, or nobody should ever make you feel like less of you.
Right.
And not everybody goes into any environment, any job, with the ability to see that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people take, especially people who are caring and nurturing, oh my God, it must be me. You know what I mean? In a bad way, not in a. We were talking earlier.
Yeah.
It's you. It's me. It's not you.
Right.
No, it's really you.
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
So I guess I don't know how you give.
I mean, I can talk about why I chose not to do surgery.
Yeah.
Maybe if that would be.
Yeah, a good example of where I'm trying to.
Yeah, I think so. So for me in medicine, the actual practice of medicine, there was nothing that I loved more than the operating room. But it was I was on a particular rotation at the end of medical school at a place where I was considering doing residency. And it was a very violent area of New Jersey where there was a lot of gang violence and things like that. And I was on the trauma surgery service. And I was taking 24-hour call every 3 days, which is not uncommon in surgery. And it got to the point somewhere along the lines in that rotation where I didn't recognize myself anymore, because I was in this system that every night young African American men would come in shot, and we would just sort of do the same thing. You do your trauma survey, and you may or may not bring them to the OR depending on how bad their injuries are. And I remember being so tired and just feeling so small because no one took anything that I said seriously. You get to a point where you don't even want to deal with those patients anymore who come in the door. You don't want to deal with another trauma. You get sort of detached from caring. And I think that's when I stepped back and I said, this is not who I am, and this is not what I want to do. You know, to me, I was saying, why isn't anyone doing a community survey in this neighborhood and figuring out why we're getting 5 gunshot wounds a night? What sort of other work is going on here? But I was in a system that was so overworked and so just focused on dealing with the issue in front of them and not the potential systems issues, that there was no time for that. There was no time for change. There was no time for assessment. And you were just too run down and tired to care. And I think that is when medicine is dangerous.
That's just
Train.
the train.
System of the train. Yeah, and that's when I said, going the other direction.
10 to 11, why wouldn't they?
Right, right. That's when I asked myself, what is it that I want to focus my medical career on? Is it, you know, the practice of medicine day to day, or is it feeling like I have a impact on a bigger scale? And that was the conversation that I had with myself, and I still have with myself.
All right, so now that I've been winging it and just having a conversation, which is how I like to do this, I don't see what questions we've already
missed,
covered.
yeah.
I mean, we've touched on these through the conversation. What are some challenges you see in medicine for residents and trainees that need to be addressed? Is there anything directly, you know, you've kind of mentioned some of the things that you've experienced.
Yeah.
What about the need for patient safety education? You want to talk about that?
Yeah. I think that the need for patient safety education starts in medical school, and in my experience is not very well developed. Like a lot of other things that I think should start in medical school, such as understanding health policy and health equity, and understanding the system in which we operate. Because we learn this great science and biology and pharmacology and all of these things, and then I was fortunate to have a background in patient safety and health policy from graduate school, but in seeing my friends from medical school who didn't have that background go out into their intern year and be completely shocked of what the system of medicine is in which they are now practicing. Yeah, I know. So it's difficult because obviously there are a lot of things that you have to learn in order to be a doctor and in order to be a resident, and trying to say, how does patient safety, how should it be addressed in medical school, and especially in residency? Residency training is so different depending on what you choose to do. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that it's a necessity, and something that should be on the table in conversations about graduate medical education, moving forward.
Wow. If there were one thing about healthcare medicine you could wave a wand and change, what would it be? Yeah. Woohoo! That's a very large...
One thing, if I could change one thing in medicine, it would probably be equal access. Because to me that is such a barrier we in this country are so fortunate to have such intelligent people working at top-ranked institutions making amazing discoveries every day. But until that level of medicine is available to every person, there will always be an injustice in medicine, and it will always be unfair, and there will always be health disparities, and there will always be miscommunication and errors. But I would like to think that if we all had equal access, some of those things would dissipate, and we could focus on these other things, and not wrangling with, can my patient have access to these services?
So one of the things that the nurse that we interviewed at St. Bernard's was saying is that the black hospitals have bad reps. She was saying that, Holy Cross is Killer Cross, and St. Bernard's, there's a name for St. Bernard's, and one of the guys young man who I had talked to, said, well, I want care at Northwestern. I don't want to go to, why do I have to go here?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, in my back of my head now, knowing what I know, I'm like, you could get hurt just as easily at Northwestern.
Oh yeah, anywhere.
I mean, it's just pretty random.
Sure.
One of the challenges for Chuck Holland, the CEO, is that he can't afford to pay people what Northwestern or Advocate can pay to come work there. Another challenge is having physicians that look like the patient population.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's a lot of related issues tied to that.
Right.
I mean, do you have any thoughts on how to fix it? I mean, this is just kind of off the cuff.
Yeah.
Like where do you see, based on where you've been now, how do you see that changing?
It's sort of a question of where does it start. I think overall investment in communities that don't have as much is where it starts. If you start educating people from those communities from a young age and giving them opportunities, medicine is not very well represented, and you have to say, well, why is that? Because people from the communities in which I work don't have the opportunity to go to medical school. Many of them may not make it through high school for various reasons. And so in order to really address that issue, I think you have to start from the ground up, essentially. I don't know. It's like every 5 minutes. I think it's sort of this cycle, right? It's addressing the social determinants of health. If we could do that, would not only make healthcare more equitable, it would make communities healthier and safer. And if we made communities healthier and safer and created opportunities for people in those communities, then hopefully some of those people would go into medicine. It's just finding where to break that cycle and how to do it. And I don't think anybody has a good answer to that yet.
I don't think there's a magic wand for it either.
Right.
You know what I mean? Why don't we break and go get coffee and
Sounds good.
do some outside stuff.
Cool.
It's that 50-minute hour, you gotta cut it out.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.